Good evening, everyone. Are you considering becoming an aviator in the National Guard or the Reserves? And you're wondering how it all works at the unit, right? Like, you go to flight school, everyone knows that. But what happens after flight school? What can you expect? How do you meet your minimums? How do you do progression? How do you get paid? Well, in this video, we're going to try to answer some of those questions. So the first thing we're going to talk about is progression. So after you finish flight school, you go to your unit. Everyone knows you have to be progressed when you arrive to your unit out of flight school. So when you first get to your unit, you're going to be designated RL3, and you're going to get with an IP, and he's going to take you from being RL3 all the way up to being RL1, where you're qualified to fly with any PC in the unit. Now, how do they do this in the Guard? It takes a lot of flights, right? Well, in the Guard, they typically put people on orders for about 2 months. So you're getting active duty pay for these 2 months that you're on orders and you're doing progression. So you're doing all of your base tasks, you're doing all your mission tasks until you're RL1. Now, you can't stay on these orders forever, so they typically want to cap it at about 2 months. But ideally, you'll be RL1 once these orders expire. And I think it's achievable. In some cases, it might not be just because of weather, a variety of things. But in most cases, 2 months is achievable, and the National Guard has done this for a long time. So, like I said, it's doable for sure. Now, how does progression work? Like, how long do you have to wait until progression starts when you get to your unit? And it can be anywhere from 1 month to 6 months, exactly like active duty. It all depends on the progression backlog. So if you're getting to your unit and you have a lot of people in progression already that just finished flight school and they got there a little bit before you, they're going to be priority and they're going to start progression before you. So you might have to wait that 4 to 6 months. However, if you're getting there and there's not a huge backlog and you show up and there's like you and another person that needs progression, you can expect to start progression relatively fast. So, how does flight scheduling work? So, you're progressed, you're now RL1, and you need to start flying to get those annual and semi-annual minimums. How do you do that? Well, most of my friends that are in the Guard have told me that there is kind of like a spreadsheet that is sent out every single week, and it has to be emailed back to the flight scheduler at a deadline within that week. So you take a look at the flight schedule, you put what day you want, and you put whatever you need to work on. So if you need NG hours, if you need IFR hours, if you need sim time, you're going to annotate that on that week that they're trying to schedule. You will then send that back to the flight scheduler, and that flight scheduler will try to make that schedule as best as they can based on everyone's needs. Sometimes you might get the flight that you want, sometimes you might not. It just all depends. When you become a PC, you can typically expect to get the flight that you want, but as a PI, you might get it, you might not. So that's how flight scheduling works. Now, the other thing that I think that is really cool, and it answered a lot of questions for me. So if you have semi-annual and annual requirements to meet, how can they expect you to meet all of this flight time in just drills and AT? Well, the answer is they don't. They have what is called additional flight training periods, or AFTPs for short. And you're allotted 72 of these per year. Now, what is AFPTs? So these 72 AFTPs that you get per year will be used to basically compensate you for flying outside of drill and AT. So obviously you have a regular job and you also have the National Guard. So what the AFTP allows you to do, if you have a flight scheduled for Tuesday or Wednesday and you work Monday through Friday, you can take off from your job, go fly for whatever weekday you're scheduled on, and receive compensation for taking that day off of work. So remember how I said you get 72 of these per year. If you use 2 of these AFTPs, that is equivalent to 1 full day of active duty pay. So if you're a W01 out of flight school and you use 2 AFTPs to go fly on a random Tuesday, you're going to receive full active duty pay in that grade for that day you use those 2 AFTPs for. And same with all the other ranks as well. So I think that is a great program that the Guard and Reserve have. And it makes total sense because being an active duty guy, I've always kind of wondered how that worked. So if you're flying Tuesdays or Thursdays or whatever, and your job is Monday through Friday, are you flying essentially for free? And the answer is no. You have these AFTPs that compensate you for those days that you fly in between the drill and AT periods. Okay, so moving on to drill. Most of you guys watching this probably already know how drill works if you're considering the National Guard or Reserve. So National Guard or Reserve, they drill once a month. That's typically 1 weekend out of the month, along with 2 weeks out of the summer. So these drills can be just a Saturday and Sunday, but they can also be a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they can even also be a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And the reason why I mention that is because if you are going Guard or Reserve, don't be surprised when they're like, hey, we need you to drill this month. It's a MUTA 5 or a MUTA 6, and it's going to be Friday through Monday. Now, it's not always like that. A lot of times it is just Saturday and Sunday, but here and there they'll throw in what they call a MUTA 5 and a MUTA 6, which is 3-day and 4-day weekends. Excuse me. Now, what happens at drill and AT? Typically, being in aviation, it's going to be flight-focused training. However, you can also expect to do some things outside of just flight training. You can expect to go to the range, do PT tests, all that Army admin stuff that we're just required to do every single year. But typically, it's going to be flight-focused. Now, deployments. Most National Guard and Reserve units are on a 5-year cycle for deployment. So what that means is you can typically expect to deploy every 5 years in the Guard or Reserve. So making pilot in command in the Guard, what's that like? So one thing that I want to highlight here is in the National Guard and in the Reserves, you don't make PC until a much higher hour level. So the going rate right now I hear in the National Guard is around 500 hours. So you're not going to even be considered for PC until you hit that 500 hour mark. Now in active duty, we're considering PCs around 350 to 400 hours, which is a lot earlier than the Guard is considering. Now why is that? So I have a theory, and I think in the National Guard, people don't really PCS like they do in active duty. So at Guard units, You may have a guy in your unit that's been there for 10 years. He's not going anywhere. He made PC, 5 years ago, and he's not going anywhere. He's there to stay. They're not PCSing this individual anywhere, to where in the active duty component, there's a much higher turnover rate. So say you're in the active duty component and you finish flight school, you go to your unit, you're at your unit for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. You get looked at for PC, you make PC. Well, you have about another year at that unit as a PC, and then you're getting considered for your track, and they're asking you where you want to go next. So you track IP or MTP or whatever track you want, and then you get sent to that school and then spit out to another duty station. Well, with this high turnover rate in the active duty, they have to generate more PCs to keep up with the PCs that are leaving, to where in the National Guard or Reserves, you don't really have that problem. So they're not in a rush to really make anyone a PC. So that's just something that I thought was kind of interesting. And that's just my theory, by the way. Now, moving on. This is the biggest consideration you want to understand before you make the leap to joining Guard or Reserve. Now, the balance of your civilian job with your Guard duties as a pilot. I hear a lot of people struggle with this. So being a pilot, you're not just a regular National Guard or Reserve person. You are a pilot in the National Guard and Reserve, and you hold a very technical skill and a very perishable skill. So you're expected to hit these minimums to where your average infantryman or logie doesn't really have these minimum requirements to make. So the point is, you're not just drilling, you're not just going to AT, you are flying, sometimes during the week to meet those minimums, and it can be difficult to balance with your civilian job and your Guard job as a pilot. Now, the ideal situation is when you get out of flight school and you go to your Guard unit, you somehow lock down a Guard active duty slot. And I know people who have done this, and it's really a sweet gig, because now you've completely eliminated the biggest stressor, which is balancing a civilian job with your guard duties. So that's the best case scenario. Now, if you have to balance your civilian job with your pilot duties at your Guard unit, that's just the way it happens. You got to figure it out and deal with it. Now, here is the best part about being National Guard or Reserve. So, if you've been following my videos for a little bit, I've talked about the restricted ATP, which stands for Airline Transport Pilot. The ATP minimums for military graduates of military flight schools, we fall under the restricted ATP, which is 750 hours of total flight time, 250 hours of fixed wing time, your PPL, your IFR rating, and your multi-commercial license. And you get to be an airline pilot simply because you went to a military flight school and you now fall under the restricted ATP. That's a sweet gig. And the reason why I'm bringing this up for this Guard and Reserve video is because you guys can very easily just go straight to the airlines once you meet those ATP minimums. To where if you are active duty, you might still have 3 or 4 years left on your ADSO before you can go get an airline pilot job. So that is a huge benefit in being a National Guard or Reserve aviator. Now, like I was saying before, the best situation would be you get out of flight school, you go to your unit, you lock down that active duty guard reserve position, whether it's an ALSI tech or some type of person that manages things at the unit full time, gets full active duty pay, and you can suck up all the flight time you want and still work on your PPL, your IFR rating, and your multi-commercial, and then meet those hour requirements for the ATP, and then go to the airlines right after that, do your guard duties here and there, but you've made it to the airlines. And that is great for the guy who wants a long-term job in aviation. Can't really get a better deal than that. Now, if you're joining the guard or the reserve and you just want to fly a helicopter because you think it looks cool, there might be some frustration with that when you find out, balancing your civilian job with your pilot minimum requirements semi-annually and annually. There might be some frustration there, but I think this is a phenomenal deal for people who want to spend their professional career in aviation. So, like I said, the biggest challenge is going to be balancing that civilian job with the guard duties. I hope this answers a lot of people's questions that I've been getting about the National Guard and Reserve. As you guys know, I am active duty, so I had to do a little bit of research, had to call around, ask some questions to some buddies I went to flight school with, and I hope I gave you guys what you were looking for. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I love interacting with you guys. And if you are not subscribed, please subscribe, give the video a like, and thank you guys for following. I'll see you on the next video.